The process and discipline of yoga has been present in North America for just over 100 years. The current popularity of yoga is just over 40 years. There's a huge misunderstanding as to what yoga is, even in the community that considers itself to be a yogic community. So I will do my best to give a context to it. Historically, ancient India had 6 schools of orthodox philosophy known as the Shad Darshana, Shad being 6. Darshana, which is often translated as philosophy, would be more accurately translated as viewpoint or way of seeing. So there were 6 schools that were integrated together and they were not in conflict. One of these 6 schools of philosophy was the school of yoga. Relative to Western philosophy, yoga held the position of psychology, and it also held many of the elements of the disciplines of science. The word yoga comes from the root yuj. This means to link, to unite, or to bring together. Sanskrit has 10 conjugations, and in 2 of the conjugations of yuj, the word actually comes to have the implication of the word samadhi. What is samadhi? We'll deal with that in just a moment. Each of the schools of yoga had a central textbook written by a great sage. The textbook of yoga is the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, and it was written by the great sage Patanjali. Yoga Sutra. What does sutra mean? The word sutra itself means thread. The English word suture comes from sutra. So a Yoga Sutra or a Mimamsa Sutra or any of these other books that were written in the sutra form have 2 elements. A sutra is a short statement that compresses an area of knowledge. The closest thing in this to the West would be a really fine chapter title that compresses the material that will be in the chapter. Also, sutra, when used in the title of a book, implies that all of the individual sutras are part of an unbroken thread. So the cultural definition of sutra, when it's in the title of a book, is a single thread, unadorned by a single bead. The definition of yoga is in the 2nd of the Yoga Sutras, Yogash Chittavritti Nirodhah. This is a very difficult phrase to translate into English because there are 4 words that have no English equivalents conceptually. If there's no concept, there can be no vocabulary. The closest that we have come to being able to translate this now is the translation by Swami Veda Bharati. Yoga is the state of consciousness in which all of the vibration in the energy field that we call the mind has come to silence, has come to stillness. He also translated it, yoga is the disappearance of the wave-making action in the energy field we call the mind. The 3rd sutra states, Tara drasta svarupe vashtanam. And this tells us, when in the state of yoga, this stillness, the person knows themselves as they are in reality. In the great commentary on the Yoga Sutra by an ancient sage named Vyasa, he makes a statement, yoga equals samadhi. So what is samadhi? Samadhi is a set of consciousnesses wherein progressively the vibration and the wave-making action in the energy field that we call the mind come to progressive levels of stillness. In the Christian tradition, we have Jesus as quoted as saying that there is a peace that passeth all understanding. It's perhaps useful to understand that in his language, Aramaic, there actually was a single word for this peace, for this state of consciousness. Enough people in his culture had experienced this that the concept was at a cultural level and therefore the vocabulary existed. This has not yet happened in the English-speaking world. Therefore, we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. The word for this already exists. The vocabulary exists. One of those words is nirvana. Another one is samadhi. Samadhi is the beginning and the progression of this state of consciousness, where the wave-making action in the energy field we call the mind comes to a close. What is this wave-making action? Some of this wave-making action might be the definition of gender. I think I'm a man. Nationality. I think I'm an American. I think this body is 65 years old. These are all vibrations. Any thought that you have, any emotion that you have, any belief that you have is a characteristic standing wave in this energy field that we call the mind. This is where meditation comes into play. There are several elements of energy interaction that goes into the composite of this thing we call I. There's a part of this I-ness, this person, that is able to observe the mind. Some schools of psychotherapy call it the self-observant ego. In terms of day-to-day life, how often have you hit your forehead and said, "What was I thinking?" This question comes from the self-observant ego that is able to look at the decisions that we've made and the logic that we use to get there and say, "What was I thinking?" and then adjust that thinking. That part of us is the part of us that can have the motivation to sit in silence and bring the mind gently to a single point, and then observe the thoughts that come to disturb that stillness. And over time, the disturbances pass away, and we can enter into that state that Jesus referred to as the peace that passeth all understanding. Is it easy? Well, in some ways, nothing could be easier because, as Patanjali pointed out, that's your essential nature. What is keeping you from being who you truly are? Very little. Just a decision. People sometimes challenge me that meditation is difficult. I'm going to take exactly the opposite. There's nothing easier. It's who you truly are. It just takes a little practice. No one expects to become a master golfer with the first swing. No athlete expects to become a champion high jumper on the first try. Do not expect to become a skilled meditator the first time you sit down and try to breathe. This is the challenge to bringing ourselves to our true nature.